The atmosphere of Planet 44 Epsilon did not welcome us. It lay upon our chest plates like a wet shroud, heavy and thick with an oppressive, suffocating density. When our Vanguard transports breached the upper stratosphere, the hull plates did not merely hum, they screamed. The guidance thrusters burned through triple their budgeted fuel just to keep our descent vectors true. This should have been an omen. I am Subcommander Vael of the 3rd Ascendant Fleet. My people have charted 1,000 worlds. We have broken empires across the void using the elegant weight of our logic and the blinding precision of our plasma lances. We were told this world was a frontier. A minor resource node claimed by a young, unrefined species known as humanity. The High Command briefs described them as soft-skinned bipeds, devoid of natural armor, lacking chitin, and possessing no venom or venom sacs. They were agriculturalists and miners. Dross. Our orbital anchors dropped at dawn, slamming into the terraformed soil of the colony settlement. The shockwave should have shattered the native morale. Our armor systems, forged from lightweight microceramic weave and powered by internal anti-gravity microcores, made us feel like gods walking among the primitives. We stepped out into the damp, heavy air, our weapons primed, expecting a bloodless pacification. The settlement was quiet. Unnaturally so. The structures were ugly, boxy things made of thick industrial plasteel, bolted directly into the bedrock with massive, oversized rivets. To our eyes it looked like a prison. We did not understand yet that it was a fortress, built not to keep an enemy out, but to keep the very planet from crushing them into the mud. My squad advanced down the central thoroughfare. The mud beneath our boots felt dense, clinging to our treading like wet cement. My armor's internal diagnostics began to chime, a soft, irritating drone in my auditory receptors. Warning. Environmental pressure exceeding optimal parameters by 14%. Local gravity constant, 1.2 standard units. I dismissed the alerts. We were the Ascendant Vanguard. A slightly heavier gravity well would tire our muscles after a few standard rotations. Yes, but our exosuits would compensate. We had the high ground of technology. We had the fire of the stars in our rifles. We cut the central power grid to the sector, plunging their crude hab blocks into darkness. We expected panic. We expected the high-pitched wailing of a broken populace begging for terms. Instead, from the deep shadows of the primary loading bays, we heard a sound. It was not a scream. It was a slow, rhythmic, terrifyingly heavy thud. Thud, thud, thud. It sounded like the piston of a heavy mining rig, striking the earth with mechanical indifference. But there was no machinery running. The grid was dead. I raised my plasma lance, signaling the Vanguard to form a defensive perimeter. My sensors picked up life signs ahead. Large depths. Moving through the dark with a deliberate, unhurried gait that defied every tactical doctrine of a suppressed species. They were not running away. They were walking toward us. And the ground beneath our feet was trembling with every single step they took. The loading bay doors groaned as they were pushed open from within. Not slid open by a hydraulic motor, but forced aside. The sound of metal screeching against metal echoed down the empty street, a raw, grating noise that set my mandibles on edge. 3 figures emerged from the gloom. They wore no combat armor. They had no glowing energy shields, no sleek helmets, no tactical visors. They were dressed in rugged oil-stained fabric and thick, heavy aprons. Their skin was exposed to the harsh, dense air of 44 Epsilon, glistening with a layer of moisture. I stepped forward, my vocal synthesizer translating my commands into their crude, guttural tongue. Citizens of the frontier, you are now under the jurisdiction of the Ascendant Fleet. Drop your tools, kneel, and accept pacification. Any resistance will be met with immediate termination. The human in the center, a broad, thick-necked male with hair graying at the temples, didn't kneel. He didn't look at my plasma lance. He looked at the orbital anchor we had dropped into the center of their square, then looked back at me. He wiped his hands on his apron, spat a dark fluid onto the ground, and spoke to his companions in a low, rumbling voice that sounded like grinding stones. Looks like the tax collectors have arrived, boys, he said. And they brought flashlights. My scout on the left, a swift-striking juvenile named Taith, lost his patience. He raised his containment rifle and fired. A hyperfilament energy net hissed through the air, expanding into a glowing web of white-hot plasma lines designed to constrict around a target, burning through muscle and flesh if they attempted to struggle. It struck the center human squarely in the chest. On any other world, the target would have collapsed, his nervous system fried, his limbs pinned to his torso by the contracting mesh. But the human didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. He looked down at the glowing net melting into his heavy canvas apron. Then he braced his legs. He dug his thick, heavy boots into the dense mud, leaned his entire torso forward, and simply expanded his chest. With a sickening, high-pitched snap, the hyperfilament lines shattered. They didn't burn through his skin. They snapped against the sheer, unyielding density of his frame. The energy net fizzled out into sparks, falling uselessly into the dirt. Taith froze. His mandibles parted in utter disbelief. The data briefs had stated these creatures were soft. They were supposed to be fragile, easily broken by the standard tools of galactic subdual. The gray-haired human took a step forward. The ground gave a dull, muted thud under his weight. "Shoot him," I commanded, my voice cracking across the squad comms. "Shoot him now." Taith raised his primary plasma lance, the energy coils whining as they charged to full lethality. But he was too slow. The human didn't run like any predator we had ever encountered. He didn't glide or leap. He launched himself. It was an explosive, terrifying burst of pure kinetic mass. His legs, built to withstand the crushing gravity of a death world, drove into the earth with such violence that the mud sprayed 10 feet behind him. Before Taith could pull the firing stud, the human closed a 20-foot gap in a fraction of a second. The human's bare hand, thick and calloused, clamped around the barrel of the plasma lance. With a casual twist of his wrist, the reinforced alloy of the weapon twisted like soft wax. The energy cells ruptured, hissing out harmless gas. With his other hand, the human formed a closed fist. He pulled it back and drove it forward into Taith's chest plate. Our armor is engineered to disperse energy blasts, to deflect high-velocity kinetic rounds from standard galactic firearms. It is made of premium microceramic weave. It was never designed to stop a solid block of calcified bone and hyperdense muscle moving with the force of a runaway freight train. The sound was like a thunderclap. The front of Taith's chest armor didn't just crack. It imploded, caving inward into a crater of shattered white shards. The kinetic energy was so immense it didn't even throw Taith backward. It drove him straight down into the dirt, liquefying his internal organs instantly. He was dead before his armor's medical sensors could even register the impact. The human stood over the broken Vanguard trooper, his fist unblemished, a slight bead of red blood trickling from his knuckles where the ceramic had cut him. He didn't look like a warrior. He looked like a man who had just struck an annoying pest. He looked up at me, his eyes cold, narrow, and entirely devoid of fear. "You're a long way from home, Bug," the human rumbled, flexing his hand. "And your armor is real brittle. Fallback procedures are failing." My HUD is flashing an endless sequence of red warnings. Trooper Taith is dead, his life signs completely flatlined, his armor registered as a catastrophic structural failure. I can hear the hyperventilation of my remaining squad mate, Lyra, over the short-range comms. She is backing away, her plasma lance shaking so violently the targeting laser is dancing across the human's face. The human doesn't blink. He steps over Taith's broken chassis, his heavy boots sinking an inch into the mud. "I am a sub-commander. I have studied the grand archives of the Citadel. I know the classification of every sentient species in the known sectors. There is a rule, a universal law of biological development. Intelligent life requires an environment of low to moderate stress to develop abstract reasoning. High-gravity worlds create beasts. They create massive, unthinking quadrupeds with thick shells and zero intellect. They do not produce spacefaring civilizations. They do not produce starships. Frantic, I authorize an emergency override to our ship's tactical database, bypassing the standard sector archives. I type a raw command into my wrist console. Query. Human homeworld. Massachusetts gravity profile. The terminal lags for a fraction of a second. Then, a blacked-out, heavily restricted naval intelligence document forces its way onto my display. It is marked with the sigil of the First Admiralty. Title: The Deathworlder Protocol. My eyes scan the text as the two remaining humans step out of the loading bay, carrying heavy, unpowered iron pry bars meant for mining. Subject: Homeworld, Sol 3. Local name: Earth. Gravity constant: 1.0 standard. I stop breathing. 1.0? This colony, 44 Epsilon, is a high-gravity world to us at 1.2, but to them, it is light. They are working on a planet that feels 20% lighter than the world that birthed them. I read on, my mandibles trembling. Atmospheric density, severe. Biological adaptations. Human skeletal structures are composed of a hyperdense calcium phosphate matrix, reinforced by millions of years of evolutionary selection against high-velocity kinetic falls and apex predatory megafauna. Muscle tissue utilizes high-tensile actin-myosin filaments with an unprecedented density ratio. Cardiovascular systems operate under immense internal hydraulic pressure to force oxygenated, iron-based blood to the brain against the constant crushing force. I look up from the screen. The gray-haired human is looking at me. To us, this atmosphere is a heavy, suffocating weight. To them, it is a playground. They are not sluggish. They are effectively operating under a permanent state of biomechanical decompression. Their muscles are built to throw around weight that would break our spines. Foreman Garrick, the central human, turns his head toward the colony's comms tower, which is currently dark. He speaks into a small plastic radio clip to his collar. "Hey Sarah. Got a couple of stray pests down here in Sector 4. They cut the breakers. Mind flipping the auxiliary grid back on? It's getting hard to see what I'm stepping on." A woman's voice cracks back through the static, calm, annoyed, completely unbothered by the fact that an orbital Vanguard has invaded her colony. "Copy that, Garrick. Give me 2 minutes. Tell those shiny bastards if they break any of my loaders, I'm billing them." Lyra screams, a high-pitched, panicked territorial screech, and unleashes a full-auto volley of plasma fire. The superheated gas streaks through the dark, striking the loading bay walls, melting the plasteel. One of the bolts catches the second human squarely on his left shoulder. The fabric of his heavy shirt vaporizes. His skin blisters, turning a raw, angry black. Any other species in the galaxy would have collapsed from neurogenic shock. The plasma has a thermal output of 3,000 degrees. It should have burned through to the bone, melting the flesh away. Lyra didn't have time to turn. She fired again, but her hands were shaking so violently the plasma bolt went wide, blasting a crater into the dirt. The burned human closed the distance in 3 heavy, deliberate strides. He didn't use the iron pry bar to swing. He used it like a lance. He drove the thick, blunt end of the iron rod straight into the center of Lyra's primary thruster pack. The solid iron sheared through the delicate anti-gravity housing, crushing the magnetic coils and forcing the high-pressure coolant to vent in a violent white hiss. Lyra went down on one knee, her armor's alarms screaming a chorus of systemic failures. She reached for her sidearm, but the human didn't let her finish the motion. He dropped the bar, reached down with both hands and grabbed the rim of her reinforced helmet. With a brutal, upward surge of his legs, using the same terrifying evolutionary torque that allowed his ancestors to hunt apex predators with nothing but sharpened sticks, he pulled. The heavy locking bolts anchoring the helmet to the torso chassis groaned. Then they sheared. The sound of metal rivets tearing out of their sockets echoed down the street like a volley of pistol shots. He ripped the helmet clean off her suit, tossing the 3,000 credit piece of military engineering into the mud like an empty ration tin. Lyra gasped, her fragile, unaccustomed lungs suddenly exposed to the raw, heavy air of the colony. She fell sideways, clutching her throat, suffocating not from poison, but from the sheer physical density of the atmosphere she had to breathe without her suit's regulators. I was alone. The subcommander of an elite Vanguard squad, reduced to a trembling target in less than 3 standard minutes of engagement. I backed away, my boots slipping in the mire. I raised my plasma lance, targeting the gray-haired foreman Garrick. My targeting reticle locked onto his chest. My finger tightened on the firing stud. If I died here, I would at least take their leader with me. A heavy, crushing weight slammed down onto the barrel of my weapon from above. I looked up. The third human, a massive, silent worker who hadn't spoken a single word, had dropped from the roof of a nearby hab block. He had jumped from a height of 20 feet. A fall like that on our homeworld would break our hollow bones into splinters. To him, in this light gravity, it was nothing. He had landed perfectly on his feet, and his downward momentum was carried entirely into a swinging blow with a structural I-beam. The steel beam sheared my plasma lance in half, driving the broken remnants into the dirt. The shockwave of the impact traveled up my arms, shattering the delicate gyros in my wrist actuators. My hands went completely numb. Garrick walked up to me, stepping over the ruined pieces of my weaponry. He stopped just inches away, towering over my kneeling form. The auxiliary power grid suddenly surged back to life. The overhead industrial floodlights roared with blinding white light, illuminating the street, casting long, dark shadows, and revealing the true horror of our situation. Windows were opening all along the thoroughfare. Doors were sliding back. Hundreds of them. Men, women, even older juveniles. They weren't cowering. They were stepping out into the light, holding wrenches, heavy rivets, mining drills, and crude kinetic hunting rifles. Their faces were grim, set with a stubborn, terrifying resolve. They looked at our grand orbital anchors in the center of their town square not with fear, but with intense irritation. "You boys made a bad math error," Garrick said, his voice flat and even as he looked down at me. "You thought because we didn't have tanks or energy shields we were defenseless. But you forgot to check the scale. We grew up on a rock that tries to pull your organs out through your boots every second of every day. To us your armor feels like tinfoil. And your soldiers, they move like they're underwater." He reached down, wrapped his thick fingers around the collar of my chest plate, and effortlessly lifted my entire 150-pound frame off the ground with one hand. My anti-gravity microcores whined, trying to compensate, but his grip was unyielding. "Now," Garrick rumbled, his eyes boring into mine, "you're going to radio that pretty little fleet of yours up in orbit? And you're going to tell them exactly what happens when you try to put a leash on an iron-boned son of Earth. If you want to hear how Subcommander Vael warns his fleet, and whether the Ascendant Armada heeds the warning or faces the full, terrifying weight of human retaliation, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. The frontline reports are just beginning and humanity is done playing nice. Don't miss the next chapter of survival. Subscribe now and join the colony." I pulled my lips back from my teeth, a desperate, reflexive display of aggression that meant absolutely nothing to the predator holding me. My communicator was buzzing inside my fractured gauntlet. It was a high-priority subfrequency broadcast from the Ascendant Radiance, our flagship hovering 300 miles above the clouds. "Vael," the voice of Fleet Admiral Kress rasped through the static, cold and demanding. "Report. Sector 4 should be secure by now. Why are the colony's orbital dampeners still operational? We are prepared to drop the secondary atmospheric harvesting rigs." Garrick didn't say a word. He merely shifted his grip on my chest plate, bringing my damaged wrist console closer to my face. The cold metal of his fingers pressed against the back of my neck, a subtle, crushing reminder that a single twitch of his hand would sever my spinal column. I swallowed hard, my vocal translator clicking as it struggled to find a tone that didn't betray my utter terror. "Admiral," I choked out, the heavy air of 44 Epsilon burning my throat. "Do not drop the rigs. Abort the secondary descent. Call back all airborne Vanguard units immediately." There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. When Kress spoke again, the clinical arrogance of our species had turned into sharp, military irritation. "Explain yourself, Subcommander. You are facing unarmored civilian settlers. Break them." "You don't understand," I screamed into the comms, my professional facade completely shattering as I looked out at the gathering crowd of humans. They stood under the glare of the industrial floodlights, completely silent, a wall of dense muscle and unyielding iron. The intelligence reports were wrong. Their biology, their home planet's gravity is a crushing vice. To them this world is an open field. They are faster than our targeting systems can track. Their kinetic strikes. Admiral, they are shattering microceramic plating with their bare fists. Taith is dead. Lyra is suffocating. My squad is gone. "Preposterous," Kress hissed. "They are primitives. Use your plasma lances. Burn them from distance." "The lances are broken," I shrieked, my eyes locked onto the massive, silent human who had crushed my weapon with a structural beam. "They don't run from the fire, Admiral. They run through it. They are made of heavier stuff than we are. If you land the heavy mechanized units, they will only give them bigger weapons to throw back at us. Pull the fleet back to safe orbit. We cannot hold this ground. We cannot hold any ground where they can walk." Garrick reached out with his free hand and tapped the interface on my wrist, severing the connection. The line went dead, leaving only the low, ambient hum of the colony's auxiliary grid. He lowered me slowly, but he didn't let go of my collar. He allowed my boots to touch the dense mud, forcing me to support my own weight on legs that felt like hollow reeds. Around us, the humans began to move. They weren't cheering. They weren't celebrating a victory. They were simply gathering up our discarded, broken weaponry, examining the twisted alloys with analytical, practical curiosity. "Good boy," Garrick said softly, his voice dropping the booming authority and settling into a cold, terrifyingly calm rhythm. "You just saved a lot of your people from a very messy evening. But your admiral doesn't sound like the type to listen to the boots on the ground." "He won't," I whispered, my mandibles drooping in despair. "He will see this as a tactical anomaly. He will send the heavy dropships. He will rain kinetic slugs from the upper atmosphere." Garrick shrugged his heavy, unarmored shoulders. The motion caused the dense muscle across his back to ripple beneath his stained shirt. He turned his head toward the massive iron mining crane towering over the loading bay, A machine built to lift hundreds of tons of raw ore against the planet's heavy pull. Let him send them, Garrick rumbled, a slow, grim smile spreading across his weathered face. We've been looking for a reason to test out the magnetic rails on our deep core mass drivers. If your fleet wants to find out what happens when a deathworlder throws a 10-ton boulder into low orbit, tell them to keep their engines running. He let go of my suit, leaving me to slump against the side of a plasteel hab block. He didn't lock me up. He didn't chain me down. He didn't need to. He knew that in this gravity, with my shattered suit and my frail bones, I wasn't going anywhere. I looked up at the dark sky, watching the faint, glowing ion trails of our fleet high above the clouds. 4,000 of cycles, the Ascendant fleet had conquered the stars by finding the weak points in every civilization we encountered. We thought we were the masters of space. But as I sat in the heavy mud of 44 Epsilon, watching a handful of human miners casually hoist structural steel beams that should have required a heavy crane, I realized the terrifying truth. We had spent our history mastering technology. Humanity had spent theirs mastering physics. And the universe belongs to the heaviest mass.